In any relationship where there are two parties, two independent parties, the method by which they communicate and get together, come together, involves 3 steps: thinking, speaking, and doing. Those are the 3 garments of the soul, as they're called in Hasidic texts. Garments of the soul. Garments are not connected, are not part of your body. You wear them as you need them, and then you take them off. You exchange them. You can wear one garment one day, a completely different garment the next day, or even the same day. They're called garments both for their virtues, what makes them really great, even more important than the emotions that they express, and also because of their faults. What is right with garments and what is wrong with garments? What is right with garments is that you can wear garments that make you look better than you are. They can give you a dignity that you don't have because you're wearing a uniform. They can bring out your natural beauty because the colors are right, they're on your palette, and they can do many, many good things to enhance who you are. The problem with them is that you can be wearing somebody else's garments. You can put on a uniform that isn't yours. You can impersonate a soldier or a policeman. So in order for the garments to be proper, like the physical garments, they need to fit. They need to be your size, tailored to you. Then they're honest, they're real, and they do the job. The job is to connect two people. How do I connect with you? How do I even know you? It's not simple. Not simple at all. Because no matter how much I study you, no matter how much I try to understand, and no matter how well I understand, it may not be you at all. Because what I think of you, which is the garment of thought, what I think of you is my business, not yours. It's my thoughts. This is what I think. So spare me the facts. I don't care whether my thoughts are right. It's what I think. It's what I see. It's what appeals to me. So when I'm thinking, I'm talking to myself. So even if I'm thinking of you, but I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to myself. I'm telling myself how you appear to me. Now, it's a beginning. At least I know you exist. Without thought, I wouldn't even know you exist. But do I know who you are? Probably not. Because the way you make sense to me, that's how I will think of you. It's the only way I can think of you. Thought serves me. It's an inner garment. An inner garment is not meant to make an impression on others. The inner garment is for my purposes. So thought, being an inner garment, has 2 features. First of all, you can't stop thinking. You can stop speaking in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a word. You change your mind, you don't want to say it. So at the drop of a hat, arbitrarily, you cut off the word. You stop. In actions, certainly, you just stop. It's just a garment. So it's completely detached from you, and therefore you can detach from it. No matter how long you've been talking, at any moment, you can stop talking. No matter how long you've been acting on something, doing some job, digging a well, at any moment you stop. It's not like if you've been doing it for an hour, you can't stop. You got attached. It doesn't get attached. It's a garment. Thought is a little different. It's still a garment, but it's an internal garment, which means you can't not be thinking. Why is it still a garment? Because you can change the subject at will. You can be thinking about one subject for hours and hours and hours and then decide, enough of that, I'm going to think about something else. Or if you're a little ADD, you don't even have to decide. Your thoughts will change every 10 minutes. Like changing a garment. The other feature of thought is that it is silent. No one knows what you're thinking. Like a garment that you're wearing, but nobody sees. So the reason that thinking is silent, unexpressed, is because it's meant to serve you, not to serve anyone else. So it's communicating to yourself. That's what people say, I dress in order to express myself. Not really. Because as soon as you're expressing yourself to others, it's not yourself anymore. The only time you really express yourself is to yourself, in privacy, in what is not said, in thought. So you think of it this way. We are two separate beings. We have separate drive, separate sensations. I don't feel when you're cold. You don't feel when I'm hungry. I don't know if you're angry unless you tell me. So I don't know what you're feeling. I don't know what you're sensing. I don't know what's going on with you. And often I'm surprised when I find out, because why would you do that? I never do that. I never think that. I never feel that. So your experiences are not only independent of me, but they're a little surprising to me, because I don't have those feelings, at least not the way you do. So how is this ever going to be bridged? How will I ever really reach you? By knowing you, I'm never sure that what I know about you is really you. So we need a bridge. A bridge is composed of three parts. A base on this side of the river, a base on the other side of the river, which means two distant realities, and then a span that connects the two bases. That's a bridge. If you know the letter Hey, the Hebrew letter Hey, the way it is written, it has a horizontal line that flows downward into a leg on the right side. So the horizontal line, continuous, uninterrupted, flows downward into a vertical line, which is its right leg. But then it looks like a daled, the letter daled, or the letter resh. In order for it to become a hay, you have to add a second leg, because a hay has two legs. The left leg has to be disconnected from the horizontal, from the head. Then it's a hay. If the left leg is as connected as the right leg, then it's the letter ches and has a completely different meaning. Like in the word matzah, you have the letter mem and tzadik, and then the hay. The opposite of matzah is chametz, the leavened, what is forbidden on Pesach. It also has a mem and it also has a tzadik. The difference is in the third letter. In the chametz, instead of a hay, there's a ches. So the ches represents forbidden food, the hay represents holy food. Obviously, the hay and the ches have very different meaning. And yet their difference in the way they're written is that tiny separation, that tiny space between the second leg and the head, or the horizontal line. But you have three strokes, which is the bridge. So here's how it works. There is the fact, the base, the reality on my side of the river. There's what I am. There's me. On the other side of the river, there's another reality, and that's you. Now, how do we bring the two together? We have to have a span that bridges them. Those are the three garments of the soul. Thought, my thought, is my side of the river, my base, my reality. Action is your side of the river. If I do for you, then it's all about you. The span is speech. So in thought, I am on my side of the river. I am thinking what I think and how it appears to me and how it makes sense to me. It's all my opinion. It's the world according to me. That's the function of thought. There's nothing wrong with that. Because I start off being me, completely independent and separate of you. That's the reality. So I discover that you exist, but you're on the other side of the river. So I have to decide in my own mind who you are, what you are, friend or foe. It's all in my mind. So I think of you the way it appears to me. I am not compromising myself in any way. I'm not stepping out of my reality at all. I'm indulging myself, but in the awareness of you. Some people think that thought is harmless. What I think of you is none of your business. I'm just thinking. Harmless. Not that harmless. What I think of you is powerful. It creates vibes. Positive vibes or negative vibes. So if I think of you negatively, I'm using you in an abusive way. I'm using you for my entertainment. If I think of you in a positive way, that sends off positive vibes. So it does make a difference, subtly. whether I'm thinking positive or negative. But it's my thought. It doesn't really tell me what you are, but when I look at how I think, I know something about myself. Because thought is from myself. So if I catch myself thinking negative, critical, jealous, lustful, then I know my thoughts are not healthy. If I find myself thinking positive, respectful, admirable, admiringly, then I know that my thoughts are good. I'm relieved to find out that my thoughts are healthy. But it's all about me, even when I'm thinking about you. Now, speech is very different. Speech is a little complex because it's 50% about me, but 50% about you. In speech, I can't just say to you whatever I want to say and call it communication. Speech is supposed to be communication. But communication means two things. I reveal something of myself, something of my feelings or my knowledge. What I know or what I feel is communicated in speech. So I am revealing something about myself. If I'm just squawking to let you know that there's danger in the area, that's not really communication. Animals do that. Why is it not real communication? It's not telling you anything about me. So speech has to be revelation of self. Something of me has to escape from me into my words. So it's got to be about me. I don't mean in a selfish, narcissistic way, about telling you how important I am. Not about my importance, but something of my experience, either intellectual or emotional. On the other hand, in order for communication to be communication, I have to speak your language. It's got to be your language or I'm not communicating. So if I decide to tell you something really significant about me, but I say it in Yiddish, I am not communicating because you don't speak Yiddish. So I have to step out of my reality and make concessions, so to speak, to your reality. And even when I'm speaking your language, I have to say things in a way that makes sense to you. If I can't make sense to you, then I'm not communicating. So yes, it's about me. That's real communication. But it has to be your way, your language, and in a way that makes sense to you. Because very often you hear somebody speaking English and you have no idea what in the world he's saying. So that is the power of speech. Then there's the power of action. The power of action is your side of the river. It's not 50% me, 50% you. It's all you. So thought is all me. Speech, 50% you. Action, 100% you. Like in the classical example of a couple who are not getting along. She says, he's not there for me. He says, I'm the best husband anyone could ever want. She asked for a flower to put in the on the table. He bought a dozen. He says, you see, I'm a great husband. She says, you see, he's not there for me. When I ask for one flower, he comes up with a better idea. Why just one? Let's have a dozen. It's never about me. It's always about him. See, this is tricky. He is convinced that he heard his wife. She wanted a flower. He brought flowers. What could possibly be wrong with that? He went beyond the call of duty. He went beyond what she wanted and asked for. He got a dozen. Now, once in a while, that could be nice. But if you do this consistently, it's very frustrating. Every time the wife has a suggestion, he has a better one. Doesn't hear her. To him, one flower is not satisfying. A dozen feels like something. So he brings a dozen. She doesn't want a dozen. So we see when it comes to action, you can't do what she asks, but your way. That's totally frustrating. This is not speech, which can be 50-50. Partly me, partly you. No, action means, are you going to do for me what I ask, or you're not going to? If you don't do what I ask, then you're doing something other. Then it's not about me at all. So when it comes to action, I have to put myself aside completely. There's no part of me in the act. For example, a poor man knocks on your door. He says, I need something to eat. You say, what you really need is a job. Go get a job. Support yourself. Be a mensch. Now, your idea is very good. Makes a lot of sense. But you didn't do what he needed. The action is missing. He didn't come asking for an opinion. He came asking for an act of kindness. So you see how the second leg of the hay, which is the action leg, must be disconnected from the horizontal line, which is your thinking. Your thought and your speech, even though they're different, they must be connected. Thought is all about you. Speech is about you communicating with somebody else. You should be thinking what you say, and you should be saying what you think. If there's a distance or a separation, even a crack between the ink of the horizontal line and the ink of the right leg, the letter is invalid. So the right leg must be connected. The left leg, the action, the deed, must be disconnected. It's got to be all about the recipient, not about you at all. That's what completes the bridge, the connection between two beings. Now, when it comes to serving God, these three faculties or these three garments take on additional significance. Thought means what I think of God. What I think of God is important to me. It tells me how my mind works. It reveals to me something about me. even if I never communicate it to anybody else. But the way I think of God, pretty skimpy. Even the greatest of scholars, who knows much about God, it's the human being viewing something way too big for his mind to fully grasp. And so in the end, we admit we'll never completely understand God. Because although we think about him, and we have some pretty good ideas, but that's how he appears to us. Don't know if that's really the truth of him. So what we really know about God is what he tells us. If he says it's true, then I know it's true. But my thoughts can't take me there, because that's just my opinion of God. Like the God I created in my image. That's why God had to speak at Mount Sinai. He had to reveal himself in order for us to know him. So when I think of God, that's good for my soul. It's good for me to have thoughts of God, to have an image, a picture, an understanding of what God is, who God is. Then there's speech. I speak to God. I express myself. I pray to him, not to get stuff. I pray to him to express myself in his language. Communicate. When God reveals himself to us, he speaks to us. That's how revelation happens, in speech. Thought does not reveal. So it begins with speech. What does God actually tell us? He tells us what he needs done. His commandments. I need you to do this, and I need you to do that. I need you to repair the world, fix the world, elevate the world, refine the world, and make the world godly. Then we can both share this world in an intimate, close relationship. So now we know what we need to do. The doing is what really creates the bridge. So far, there is the part of me that is just me, does not really connect me to God at all. Those are my thoughts. Then there's the speech, in which I'm expressing my needs, myself, my thoughts, my feelings about God. But that's only 50% me. It's not all of me. And it's only 50% you, it's not all of you. That's how speech works. So it's an amazing thing to be able to speak God's language, to be able to say his words. That's really a profound experience in itself, which is the experience of true prayer. And although we're using words that are not even our own, but they're his words. So it's really good communication. Only when it comes to action, when I do the mitzvah, I have crossed the bridge. I've crossed the river. I am now on his side completely. Because when it comes to action, it's all him. When I put on tefillin, for example, there's no part of that that is about me. None. It's his mitzvah. And when we say his mitzvah, we mean the power of the act, the power of the deed. So, when it comes to a relationship, and this is really amazing, when it comes to a relationship, my wisdom doesn't help me much. Unless you need my advice, my wisdom doesn't do anything for you. You may admire my wisdom, but that's not a relationship. My love, my compassion, all of my emotions don't do much for you. They're my emotions. I'm in love. I am feeling compassion. Yes, I'm in love with you, but that's me. The relationship begins when I put on my garments. In thought, I am inviting you into my world. I'm thinking about you. In speech, I'm communicating to you. And in action, I am there for you. Those are the three steps, the three garments. And they can be more valuable and more powerful in our relationship than how smart I am or how much I love you. Very smart people who very much love their spouse can have a miserable marriage. On the other hand, a person who's not that bright and not that emotional, but he thinks about his wife, he communicates to his wife, and he's there for her. Pretty good marriage. Sure, the love would spice it up, but it's a good marriage. There's a relationship there that can be spiced up. But the love without the garments is just a spice, and there's nothing to put it on. So that is the power of the action. But even within ourselves, if you want to change something in yourself, you want to improve something in yourself, where do you begin? Where do you begin? I want to be more considerate of others. How do I start? I want to be friendlier. Because I want to have friends. How do I start? I want to be more responsible. I've been reckless. Need to be more responsible. How do I begin? You would assume start with thinking. Hey, think about it. Give it a lot of thought until you're thoroughly convinced that you really do need to become friendlier or more responsible or more compassionate. And then talk about it. Talk about it to a therapist. Talk about it to your friends, to your spouse. Talk about it. You want to be friendlier? Say friendly things. You want to be more responsible? Speak responsibly. And then you'll do the responsible thing. You can assume that that is the process from the top down. Start with the higher faculty or the higher garment, which is thought, bring it down to speech, and eventually you'll get your act together. It can also work the other way. Get your act together. The act will bring the communication, and the communication will bring the thought. Work your way up from the bottom up. Your actions will affect your emotions. Your actions will affect everything. You even start to understand things differently when you act differently. I read somewhere where the part of the brain that controls depression, sadness or depression, is the same part of the brain that controls hand activity. So if you do handy work, it can protect you from a depression, even get you out of a depression. You need to work with your hands in order to get yourself out of your head where the depression sits. So action can have an effect on the brain. One of our teachers once said, I went to a doctor complaining about headaches, and after examining me, he said, your shoes are too tight, and that's causing your headache. He thought that was amazing. If your shoes are tight, it can affect your head. In other words, if your actions, the feet are action, if your actions are not correct, then your head is off. If your actions are correct, your head is on right. So you can start from the action, and that will affect the more subtle or higher parts of yourself. Simple example. Do you give charity in order to become a more generous person? Or should you be a more generous person so that you will give charity? What is the project? What's the end goal? To make you a better person or to make sure that nobody goes hungry? So giving charity doesn't mean ennoble your character. It means somebody needs to eat. Give him some food. It's not about you. A chassid way back in the first generation of Chabad teachings came to the first Chabad Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, and he said, something's bothering me. I give a lot of charity. He was a wealthy man back in Russia. He says, I give a lot of charity, a lot of hospitality. There are people in my house all the time. I feed them well. My problem is, how can I ever be sure that all this generosity is sincere? How do I know I'm sincere? How do I know I'm not doing it for some ulterior motive, some hidden motive? It's a pretty sensitive person to ask a question like that. Most people would just be very proud of themselves and content knowing that they do good. But this man was bothered. Am I sincere? After a few moments of thought, the Rebbe's answer to him was, the hungry man, when you feed him, enjoys the food sincerely. What more do you want? In other words, even the question, am I sincere, is inappropriate. This is not about you. When a poor person needs to be fed, your sincerity is of no value, of no relevance, and should not be distracting you. from the sincere enjoyment that the poor man has when you take away his hunger. When it comes to action, it's all about the other, not about you at all. So what would be the ultimate act of charity? A poor man comes to your kitchen, to your house. He's hungry. He asks you for some soup. You say, sure. You're a good man. You're not going to turn him away. The guy needs a little soup. You give him some soup. But the ultimate in action would be if you would ask him, what soup would you prefer? What's your favorite soup? Because this is all about you, not about me. So on a subtle level, if I say, the guy says, I need some soup. And I say, oh, I happen to have some potato soup. That's what I happen to have, so that's what you're going to get. Pretty decent. But how much more beautiful is it when you say, well, which soup would you prefer? Whatever it is, I'll get you some. I'll cook it up. In other words, since I'm doing it for you, it should be all about you. All your way, not my way. Of course, if he's very hungry, you don't wait to cook another bowl of soup. You give him whatever's ready. But not because that's what you have, because it's not about you. There's a very profound story here. The man is trying to be sincere. The man is trying to do his mitzvah in the best and finest fashion. And the Rebbe says to him, your sincerity is of no interest right now. Worry about your sincerity when nobody is hungry and there's nobody to feed. In other words, when there is no need for action. Then you can live in the world of thought and examine your motives and think about your sincerity and improve. If there are ulterior motives, get rid of them. Sure, self-improvement is always a good thing, but not when an action needs to happen. When it comes to action, your thoughts, your opinions, your feelings, even your sincerity is of no significance compared to the deed that needs to get done. That's the great equalizer. When the simple man, unlearned, sincerely, out of simplicity, gives somebody some charity, the act is as great, as perfect, as the act of charity performed by the greatest chacham, this most saintly individual. The act is the same. They each may be experiencing it differently, but in the act they are the same. Because the act is always about the other. So if a poor man gets a bowl of soup from a simple peasant, or he gets a bowl of soup from the king himself, what difference does it make? To his hunger. To his ego, maybe it makes a difference. Wow, the king is serving me. Okay, that's an ego nurturing. To the hunger, it's the same. When the Rebbe was a young boy, just after his 3rd birthday, he was wearing his new kippah. And it was a hot day back in Russia. And a man walked by, a Jewish man who had drifted from Jewish observance. And he said to the boy, to the Rebbe, "It's so hot. And you're wearing this big yarmulke, this big kippah. It's too hot. Take it off." The Rebbe said, "You're not allowed." So the man said, "It's okay. I'll take the sin on my account. I'll take responsibility for the sin." And this young child said to him, "What difference does it make who does the sin?" See, a sin is an act that God is not comfortable with. That's why we don't do it. The man said, "If it's a sin, I'll pay for it. I'll take responsibility, and if there's any punishment, I'll be the one getting punished." The Rebbe said to him, "No, it's not about whether you get punished or not. It's an act that God doesn't like. So what's the difference who does it to him?" That is quite mature. If you're talking about sinful thoughts really has more to do with me than anybody else, because I'm corrupting myself. I'm taking myself to some not nice places. And what will I become? What will that do to me? Even in speech, I am speaking vulgar. I'm speaking nasty. It's a very strong reflection on me. What is happening to me? What am I becoming when I speak threateningly or vulgarly? But when it comes to action, you got to get yourself completely out of the way. If what you're doing is wrong, you are wronging somebody, and that's the only thing you should be concerned with. Yes, you're corrupting yourself too. If you're robbing banks, what are you becoming? A bank robber. But that is so insignificant compared to the fact that you're depriving people of their money. So it's really all about the other person, not about yourself. That's the beauty of action. Action is that final step that takes me away from my side of the river and completely into your side of the river. I am here for you. So when we do a mitzvah or refrain from doing a sin, whether I'm putting on the tefillin or not working on Shabbos, that's an act. It's all about him. It's all about God who gave me the mitzvah, who asked for this act. So here's the beauty of it. When God presented the Torah to other nations, the Medrash tells us, the other nations asked some questions and God said, never mind, it's not for you. When God offered the Torah to our ancestors, to the Jewish people, right after they came out of Egypt, were brought out of Egypt, our ancestors said, we will do and we will hear. First we'll do it, yes. and then we will study it so that we know how to do it properly. So what was their first reaction was, yes, we'll do it. Where did that come from? What inspired that answer? And what did the other nations do that was wrong? They asked some questions. Kind of makes sense before you sign on the dotted line. Find out what you're committing to. See, because when God came and said, I have commandments, the nations rationally asked, what kind of commandments? What's a commandment? Very rational question. But when they asked that question, God said, never mind, you blew it. When God came to our ancestors and said, I have commandments, the first thought that occurred to our ancestors was, he's the commander. It's his commandment. He's the commander. Well, if they're his commandments, then my answer is yes. I don't care what the commandments are. Once I know who the commander is, I have no further questions. So if they're your commandment, yes, I'll do them. Now, what's a commandment? What are your commandments? So what did we say yes to? Not the commandment, the commander. We said yes to him. If they're your mitzvahs, I'm in. I'm there for you. Obviously, if I'm there for you, whatever it is you need, that's what I'm going to do. You need tefillin? Fine, I'll get the tefillin. Frankly, I'm not sure what tefillin are and why you would do that and what meaning it has, but I don't care. I'm doing it for you, not for me. That's why in some way, the mitzvahs from which I get no benefit whatsoever, no satisfaction whatsoever, those are the greatest. Because that's all for him. None at all for me. Same is true in a marriage. See, that your wife wants a flower, you bring a dozen flowers. Well, you figure it's good for her, but it's also good for me. I like a bunch of flowers. One flower looks lonely. So what I just did when I bought my wife a dozen flowers, I was buying myself the flowers. I was entertaining and satisfying myself. And of course, when it comes to intimacy, you can be very selfish. And it will affect the relationship. If it's about you, then it is not a proper act. Action, if you're doing it for someone else, has to be all, not partly theirs. It's got to be all theirs. Exactly the way they ask, the way they want, what works for them. So we want to create a oneness, certainly with God. The whole purpose of all of the commandments is to become one with him. He keeps Shabbos, you keep Shabbos with him. He is generous and feeds many of the poor, you feed the rest. Join him, become one with him through the mitzvahs. But that oneness happens primarily because of the action. Loving God doesn't really do it. I was on a plane, long story short, sitting next to a missionary woman. First half of the flight, she did her thing, missionized, told me all about Christianity. Second half of the flight, I told her a little about Judaism. Towards the end of the flight, she said, "Let me ask you a question. I had a dilemma, and I'm wondering how you would handle it. My 14-year-old daughter was arrested for shoplifting. $400 worth. They caught her at the door. She says, I'm a missionary. My husband's a missionary. You know how embarrassing it is for us to be called into the police station? Your daughter was arrested for shoplifting. And the worst part of it, she says, my daughter is not even repentant. She's not even apologizing. Doesn't feel guilty. Has no conscience. So I said, why should she feel bad? Why should she be repentant? It's your religion, not hers. She says, that's exactly what my daughter said. I said, I know. Many teenagers feel that way. It's not their religion, it's their parents' religion. So I asked her, did you ever tell your daughter that God objects to stealing? God doesn't want her to steal. Did you ever tell her that? She said, we don't speak like that. We don't talk in terms of commandments and laws. We taught her to love God. The power of action. It may very well be that the daughter loves God and assumes that God loves her. Since she loves God and God loves her, God will certainly be understanding if she helps herself to some merchandise. Why not? Out of love, God will forgive her. Never even get angry at her in the first place. No one ever told her that stealing was objectionable to God. So the act of stealing had no recipient. There was no one you were doing it for. You don't do for yourself. You think for yourself. You feel for yourself. Emotions. You don't do for yourself. Real action is for others. You make yourself lunch, it's not a deed. Certainly not something you're going to write in your diary and be proud of. The power of the deed is, if it's for you, then I will do it your way. Before I ask for any explanations and before I come up with a better idea, like that husband, I'll do it. I'll do what you ask and exactly the way you want it, because it's all about you, not about me. One final thought. Adam and Eve were created in the Garden of Eden, and they were immortal. Only when they ate from the tree of knowledge did they become mortal. Now, God creates human beings who will live forever. And he gives them commandments. Be fruitful and multiply. work the garden and protect it. You imagine giving somebody who is immortal a commandment. If you're really immature, somebody says to you, do that, don't do that. You're immortal. I can imagine that your thinking would be, I should do that. What if I don't? What are you going to do? Kill me? I'm immortal. You don't want me to do that? Well, what if I do? See, when you're immortal, you have no ulterior motives because you're not afraid of anything. You don't need anything. See, immortal meant you're not dependent on food. Because if you're dependent on food, you're mortal. Just a question of what's going to make you die. But if you're dependent on food, you're already mortal. So when they were immortal means they didn't have to drink, they didn't have to eat, they were going to live forever without any provisions. So what was the threat? There's no threat. When the Jews in the desert were given commandments, it was like in the Garden of Eden. They had no fears. There were no threats. God had just taken them out of Egypt, performed wonders, marvelous miracles for them, pretty heady stuff. Split the sea for them, spoke to them face to face. And yet when God said, these are my commandments, they said, sure. No questions. Because although I have no reason to do them, because I'm content being the way I am, but if they mean something to you, they're your commandments, absolutely. I will do it. Not I will study it, or I feel for you. You've touched me with your words. No, I will do it. This is really about you, not about me at all. Unfortunately, over time, we developed a religiosity, which means spiritual needs. I need the mitzvah. I need to get to heaven and things like that. It's not how it started. It's not how it started. God said I had commandments, and we said, your commandments, what's the question? Of course we'll do it. Then we found out whether there's reward, there's punishment, you go to heaven, you go to hell, you go up, you go down. It was all irrelevant when we said yes, because we said yes to him, not to the reward. So if you want to get closer, do something. Do something completely for the other. Leave yourself out of it. Loving the other person, there's a lot of you in that. There's a lot of pleasure in loving. Intimacy, there's a lot of pleasure for you in it. Cannot claim to be doing it for the other. But when you do something that only your spouse wants, you don't really enjoy it much at all. And without your spouse, you would never do that. You're doing it just for him or just for her, which means you're different from each other. That's the best part. That's the best part. You don't want to become clones. You don't want to be married to your shadow. You want to be married to someone who needs things you don't need, who enjoys things you don't enjoy, who has feelings that you don't share, fears, ambitions that are not yours. But if that's what they want and that's what they need, that's what I do. That is the ultimate bond that bridges the distance between us. I still may not understand you properly, and I may never understand you properly, but I am there for you. And that happens in action. So that's why God speaks mostly of actions. Of course, there's the mitzvah to love God, but that's just one out of 613. There's a commandment to pray to God, to turn to Him in a time of need. Okay, that's 2 out of 613. Most of the commandments, by far, are actions, not opinions and not feelings. And that's why we're going on 3,333 years. We've been doing it. No, not perfectly. This is not about my perfection. This is about His deeds, the deeds that He asks for. So we still give charity, we still raise our children, we still get married, we still eat a little matzah on Pesach, we fast on Yom Kippur, we eat latkes on Hanukkah. We do the stuff, and that's the best. That's the ultimate. Particularly today. Today, more than ever before, the world is suffering from narcissism. People can't get past themselves. They can't. And democracy cannot work. If it's every man for himself, democracy is over. Then the only way to keep a country together is through a dictatorship. Because nobody is going to agree with anybody unless forced. It's a scary thought. Democracy is based on selflessness, a devotion to an ideal that is bigger than me and more important than me. Narcissism says there is nothing else besides me. Certainly not something more important. There's nothing. There's just me. It's got to be my way. It's got to be my way. So I cannot tolerate you unless you follow my way. Marriages are suffering, families are suffering, communities are, business is suffering. No, there's no cooperation. You got to either bribe or punish or threaten. Hopefully, the time that we spend alone with a little isolation, hopefully we've been thinking about this, realizing that it can't be my way. What's the virtue of it being my way? What's the virtue of it being your way? Virtue means it's the right way. That may not be my way, may not be your way, but it's the right way. So we both have to surrender our narcissism and do what's right. Of course, insisting that your way is right is part of narcissism. Only you can be right. And it's not about the ideal, it's about me. So the safest place is in the action. If I do something for you, that's the real thing. We're seeing a lot of it now. People have become more thoughtful of each other. People will go out of their way to help another person. Good things are happening. So the narcissism is having a flare-up, pretty nasty. But what's really going on, people are getting better. And when people get better, the deeds get done. That's how we bring Mashiach. That's how we make the world, the physical world, a godly place. Because the physical responds most to activity. So let's do the right thing. I think Abraham Lincoln said, "Well done" is a bigger compliment than "well said." And that's well said. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity. And let's get it done. Let's get it done. An act of charity, a deed, even if it's a call, a phone call, even if it's a message, even if it's delivered orally, but it's the act. You went out of your way and you did something for someone. That's where all the power lies. So let's make this a better world. Let's do it. Shalom Aleichem. How are you? You know, I do a lot of talking, a lot of Zooming, many classes, many subjects, but that's all formal stuff. Hopefully good stuff, but formal. We also have a Wednesday night meeting that's more informal and kind of Hamish. If you want to join us for that kind of an event, interactive, time for questions and so on. If you want to join us for this side of conversation, click on the link below and join us every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. Well, maybe not every Wednesday night, but we try to make it every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, a more informal chat, which can be more enjoyable at times than the formal stuff. So check it out. Click on the link and join us. Try it. You'll like it.